Hi class. In this video, I will be reviewing some of the topics that are covered in Chapter 9 on the topic of environmental health. Now, I noticed that in our chapter, it focuses a lot on the role of professionals in the area of environmental health. So I just briefly wanted to go over what environmental health is all about. So when we're talking about environmental health, it really involves understanding the impacts of environmental and human-made hazards and protecting human health and ecological systems against these hazards. So this includes studying the impacts of human-made chemicals on wildlife or human health, as well as how the environment influences the spread of diseases. So one of the first areas of environmental health that I want to talk a little about is different types of environmental hazards, which are really things that a lot of times we are exposed to every day. So here is an image of different types of environmental hazards. And the truth is, to better understand them, we could think of them as falling into four primary categories. So we're looking at physical, chemical, biological, and cultural. So when we're talking about physical hazards, they are the physical processes that occur naturally in the environment. These include natural disaster events, like earthquakes, tornadoes, volcanoes, blizzards, landslides. Not all physical hazards are discrete events. Some are ongoing, like ultraviolet radiation. Then you have your chemical hazards. Chemical hazards can be both natural and human-made chemicals in the environment. Human-made chemical hazards include synthetic chemicals that we produce, like disinfectants or pesticides or plastic. Some chemical hazards occur naturally in the environment, and this is like heavy metals like lead and mercury. Some organisms even produce natural chemicals that are an environmental hazard, such as compounds in peanuts and dairy that cause allergic reactions in humans. Then we have number 3, the third category, which is biological hazards. And these hazards come from ecological interactions between organisms. So we're looking at viruses, bacterial infections, malaria, and tuberculosis. These are all examples of biological hazards. So when these pathogens and diseases are transferred between organisms, it's called an infectious disease. And the last category that I'm gonna briefly go over are cultural hazards. So these are known as social hazards, and they result from your location, socioeconomic status, occupation, and behavioral choices. So, and this kind of overlaps with the topic of social determinants of health, right? So for example, smoking cigarettes is hazardous to your health, and it's a behavioral choice. If you live in a neighborhood with lots of crime, this is a hazard based on your location. Similarly, similar examples go with your diet, exercise habits, primary mode of transportation. These all influence your health and the health of the environment around you. So now I'm going to go into just briefly go over the topic of indoor environmental hazards. So as you can see, environmental hazards, they come from a variety of sources. While many hazards come from outdoor sources, we also have those indoor environmental hazards, which are very important to understand because we spend so much time inside. You know, you could be in your home, your office, car. These are all part of your environment, And they're also considered sources of environmental hazards, but again, they're indoor. So an example of an indoor hazard is like radon gas. It's colorless, odorless, radioactive gas that seeps into homes from rock, soil, and water underneath. So it is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the US. And right behind that leading cause of lung cancer, we have tobacco smoke. I'm sure we've all heard of lead and how it's also an environmental hazard. So lead is a toxic heavy metal that can cause damage to major organs like your brain, liver, kidneys, stomach. It could actually lead to anemia, hearing loss, mental impairments. Lead is found in homes in old pipes and paint. And when water passes through these lead pipes, it contaminates the water, ultimately causing lead poisoning. And lead in paint is especially dangerous for children because babies and young children, they tend to peel paint from walls, then eat or inhale the lead, which is poisonous. Another indoor hazard is asbestos. So it's another indoor hazard. It has long been used for insulation in buildings, but its good insulating properties also make it dangerous. So when asbestos is inhaled, the fibrous structure of this mineral actually makes it stick in your lung tissue, and the rest of the body then produces an acid to try to fight it. Then the acid actually scars lung tissue, but doesn't really do much to get rid of the asbestos. And the result is lung cancer or non-functioning lungs. So because we know the dangers of indoor environmental hazard, there have been great efforts to remove them from our environment. So you have radon detection kits that are available to test homes for the presence of radon gas. You have pipes used in new home construction that contain much less lead than in older homes. And there are a lot of paints now that are lead-free. So really quick, a recap of what we covered regarding types of environmental hazards. We went through the physical hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards, as well as cultural hazards. And we went through each one. And we went through the indoor hazards as well as those that are found outdoor. Now, being aware of these hazards is great, but then we have all these other questions, right? How do we know which chemicals to restrict or ban? How do we fight disease? How do we protect people from natural disasters such as earthquakes and floods? And these are not easy questions, but it does lead us to the topic of risk assessment. So here we are in the slide for risk assessment. Now, when understanding environmental health, it's very important to determine which substances and activities are most dangerous and which are safe. And how do we begin doing this is through risk assessment, which is really the measurement and comparison of the risk involved in an activity or a substance. So this means that problems are identified and then compared with the risk of other similar activities or substances. And risk assessment involves a number of different processes that all work together to determine overall risk. So here we are looking at a step risk assessment process. So as you can see, there's hazard identification. Is it safe or not? Is it causing health problems? Then you have these two different types of assessment. There's the dose response assessment. This is looking at level or amount of exposure. And then exposure assessment. How much of the pollutant are people exposed to for what length of time? So dose response is what are the health problems at different exposures, and then the exposure assessment we're looking at how much of the pollutant are people exposed to during a specific time period, leading us to the risk characterization. Now, this goes definitely along lines of the area of epidemiology, which we do cover in this course. But I just briefly wanted to kind of give you an idea, a little more about environmental health, other than just the roles that are played, the function of people in the area of environmental health regarding their education, and their function, just to kind of a little more information on what environmental health is all about. And this is, of course, a very brief overview of the topic. Again, if you have any questions, concerns, never hesitate to let me know. And this is kind of the quick chapter takeaway that I wanted to add for chapter 9. All right, class, take care. Bye.